All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the EDC Coffee Chat, Coffee with Colleen. We're excited and thankful to have some of the leaders of Fork City government joining us today. And that is Mayor Tim Fletcher and Audrey Grafstrom, who has some slides. And then also, of course, the famous Rod Fleck. So
Wow.
infamous.
Infamous.
So I wanted to, before they get going, I wanted to make sure that everybody saw all the different details that are in the last, I know we send out a lot of newsletters, but the last newsletter had a lot of new information in it, you know, grants for farmers markets, for example, and wineries, special ones that target certain types, agribusiness, agritourism. And anyway, there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of funding flowing through now and going forward. So we're trying to be as concise as possible and make it fairly easy for you. So with that, really, again, thankful to have these folks on with us today to share what they're doing on the West End. They're a critical part of our community, of course. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Mayor Tim Fletcher.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I come from a mixed race family. My father was born from German and Scottish immigrant parents, and my mother was a Native American. I grew up in a large family, and in my youth, I was a logger until I decided to change my opportunities in different areas, and I moved into technology. There I was a network administrator for 20 plus years, and I retired from there and moved into part-time work, and also mayor of this great city of Forks, Washington. As a strong mayor, my staff keeps the day-to-day business going in the office, and I make my decisions based on community input and my staff's input. I have total administrative authority with political independence, and I have the power to appoint and dismiss department heads without approval of the council or public input. The buck stops with me. Okay, with that being said, I'll have a few comments about what's happening in Forks, and then I'll turn it over to my staff. What's happening in Forks? We're putting COVID behind us and we're moving on. Tourism numbers are up, along with sales tax collected. Tourism has never been better, along with our sales tax. 2021 is looking great so far. So we can't keep them away no matter how hard some have tried. We're looking at a residential building boom right now, Fork style, 15 plus homes. We have the potential of a large employer moving into the area. We look forward to working with them. And the ever-growing possibilities of our Forks businesses and our twilight business, or our tribal businesses and their opportunities. Despite our state and federal government's continued efforts through the use of bad science and ill-informed mid-level unelected department heads and managers, we carry on Forks and the West End. With that, I'll turn it over to Rod and Audrey. They can backfill what I've said.
Thank you, Mayor Fletcher. I'm going to take it first. And so as Colleen said, I'm Audrey Grafstrom and the clerk treasurer here at the city. I've been here 9 years now. Time flies. I just want to share some interesting numbers that we've seen here at the city in the last year, and the mayor touched on some of those. And I do have a few slides to share. Let me see if I can get that going. Are you able to see that? Colleen?
Not yet. Let's see. You've shared the screen. I know. Yeah. You pressed share down below, or you selected the screen you want to share?
I thought I did, but let me try that one more time.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, got it.
Yes.
So, yes, Mayor Tim Fletcher is out at his part-time job right now. So that was who was speaking earlier. Here's a picture of our city council. And I just wanted to review, as far as operations this last year, Fork City Hall did remain open throughout the pandemic. There was a time period, March 16th to June 8th, where we operated with staggered shifts here at City Hall. And I would say skeleton crew, but we already operate on a skeleton crew under normal operations. And the police and corrections and public works did operate with normal staffing during that time. And then June 8th, we began with, we stopped the staggered shifts, and we had continued to have masking and plastic partitions, and then employee self-screening. With our city council meetings, those have been held over Zoom for the last year. And we had our first hybrid meeting of combination in person and Zoom on just this last March 22nd. So just looking at the occupancy in council chambers, and so some of the staff and council members were present via Zoom, some were here in person. So we're continuing to figure that out, I think, as is everyone else that has open public meetings. And with the council meeting, we post that link on our website for people that want to attend. I've got some, like I said, interesting statistics to me anyway. And that first one, I had second thoughts about putting that one up there. You can interpret that however you wish. But through the police department, the city issues concealed pistol licenses. We saw a huge jump in 2020. We went from 117 the previous year to 172. And first quarter 21, we're at 52. So that's on pace, if it holds, for 208 for the year. Some of that was business from the rest of the county, since we were the only ones issuing those for quite some time. A few. We did see a lot of people travel to the West End to obtain fingerprint cards for employment purposes, whatever purposes, because we were the only ones doing those at the time. So the mayor mentioned a building boom. You know, it's all relative. This is basically a building boom for Forks. And well, you see the one comment there, for 3 years, we only issued 2 permits for a single family residence. And so 2019, we had 5, 2020, there's 11. 5 of those are through the Housing Authority. And then so far, first quarter, we've got 3 building permits for single family residences. And building permits and real estate excise tax, keep in mind, that's just the city limits of Forks, which is actually quite small compared to our service area. And real estate excise tax, my husband can attest to this, been quite busy. In 2019, we've got the 14,000. 2020 jumped up to almost 26,000. And then we're on pace, if that holds, to pass 40,000 in real estate excise taxes. So, you know, we're experiencing the same thing the rest of the state is. That the issue right now is a lack of inventory. Some of the other statistics that we noticed changes in 2020. Motor vehicle fuel tax was down 12%, and that impacts our street fund quite severely, and we use those monies to for the local match for any street projects. So that was quite a dip there. Strangely enough, our sales tax receipts were up almost 5.5% for 2020 compared to 2019. And a great deal of that can be attributed to construction, but in looking at the reports, a lot of it is merely retail sales, and a lot of it is online, from online sales, since we have destination-based sales tax. Lodging tax, that's kind of misleading because we had the few months where it was basically shut down, but then we also had some record months, and I've got that chart to show in more detail. And so you may or may not know the City of Forks operates a jail, and we typically take a lot of contract holds from other municipalities, but people weren't arresting people, and so therefore we didn't have a lot of contract holds. And another big impact was with the Rainforest Arts Center. We'd had no event rentals in that facility, and which helps offset the cost of running the building. So that was an issue there. And also interest income. Part of the issue driving home sales is the low interest rates. Well, the converse of that is the interest income. And so in numbers, that was about 50,000 down to 25,000, the same amount of principal. So here's a chart, just a graphic I use for sales tax receipts. And, you can see the patterns here. And looking at 2020, it was following. So here you can see the timing down below. So like what we receive in April was actually paid in sales tax receipts in February. So we're climbing out of it here and see a gradual climb, and then all of a sudden June, and we have had record numbers for sales tax. And then if you go ahead and look at 2021, we're already 20% higher than the previous year.
And so Audrey, what's driving that? What segment is driving the much higher sales tax? And it's so interesting that it drops so much in let's see, paid January, received in March. I guess people just buy more over Christmas and then they don't spend in January, or they're returning items in January.
Right. Yeah. So it's a credit.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Those are seasonal cycles that we see there.
What is driving, what segment of sales tax would you say? And is that, I put a question in the chat, is if someone has a delivery from Amazon and it goes to Forks, do you receive that sales tax?
Yes, it is destination based. So all of these people sitting at home during the pandemic, shopping online, thank you very much. And yeah, I can measure that just by the number of Amazon packages that are delivered to employees at City Hall.
Yeah. And
right,
so,
no comment.
Does that, is that reflected just in like retail segment, or if someone buys something that is, if someone were to, I don't know, let's say it was a motorcycle part, will it show up in automobile parts, or will it show up just in like general retail if it comes through Amazon?
Oh, if it comes through Amazon, well,
Oh,
I mean, you can run it by SIC codes, but my reports show by merchant.
Yeah,
So,
Amazon's everything. So I just wonder
right.
if that
But it's
parts is.
also say construction supplies that are delivered within the city limits.
Okay.
It you know, I've actually had to educate quite a few Port Angeles merchants. In fact, when was it, a year or two ago, where the county's rate was different than ours, and we were actually able to find several merchants that delivered to the Forks area that were not reporting it to the city of Forks because the sales tax rate was different.
Mhm.
One of them was a long-time vendor with the city. So yeah, it is destination-based sales tax. Like I said, a lot of that is construction. A lot of that is purely retail sales.
Okay, thanks.
And then lastly, I have the lodging tax chart. And so you can see here, 2020, the huge dip when it was basically shut down. So April, the month of March, it started falling. And then we're climbing back out of it. And you've got, higher than previous year here, and also starting for 2021. For 2021, we're already 34% higher than we were for the previous year. So that's all I have. I'm going to turn it over to Rod.
so I'm gonna share screen just briefly, and I mean, I think the mayor did a great job explaining some of the opportunities and the way we function. Audrey did a great job showing you where we're seeing a lot of opportunities and increases, and then I guess I get some of the challenges. And so I try to have folks get a sense of where we are in Forks. We're in the center of what's referred to as Olympic Experimental State Forest. These are the census tracts predominantly associated with that. And it's about 10,000 people. We're a city of around 3,670 people. And we act as the commercial hub for about 10,000 people or so that live here. And then during tourism season, that swells significantly. And Audrey's charts help reflect that. This is also all the OESF is in our designated opportunity zone tracks. And that's great. That has some opportunities for business investment. And as we're talking with some of the potential inquiries, we are able to highlight that. But one doesn't get to be an opportunity zone just because you're in a lovely place with a lot, beautiful skies and trees and whatnot. And so some of our challenges are associated with lower medium income, poverty, and unemployment. So that's kind of a driver as we deal with things here. The other thing, Forks, I would say, has kind of a attitude of we'll make it work. A challenge arises, let's figure a solution, we'll make it work. From the top on down, that's kind of the approach and attitude. Which is great, but when Audrey mentioned a skeletal crew, she wasn't joking. There's a lot of times where department heads, their staff wear multiple hats. The concealed license permit, for example, is one I'll mention. My assistant, Narissa Davis, who's my legal assistant, she's the HR director, and she was also the one doing almost all those processing of those permits, helping the police department with that. And so those are the type of challenges we get when we get new opportunities. And we're going to talk about a few of those. One of the biggest challenges, like everybody else, was COVID. COVID took on a life of its own. Our numbers on the West End, you'll hear me knocking on wood, have stayed relatively flat since the start of the year. Since mid-February, I think our Forks Community Hospital number has stayed flat. and the county has seen their numbers increase, especially more in the last week and a half. That doesn't mean we have been immune from COVID. It's taken up a lot of time and effort. I'd say the positive bright spot is that we've had a very aggressive COVID vaccination effort, and working with the Forks Community Hospital, the school district, the college, Coast Guard, Fire District, Ho Tribes, Health Director, and many volunteers from other groups and organizations. So we've been able, we think our numbers are pretty much in that 35 to 45% vaccinated here on the West End of the total population, which is a big deal. So that's a good thing. Colleen, you asked a couple things, and I'm going to backfill one thing the mayor said about state agencies. I will say COVID has been a challenge. Interpreting governor's directives and executive orders is somewhat like my grandmother when I was a young boy. She was first generation American, Scottish parents, and Grams would read tea. And I was like, well, what do you mean you see something in that mess there in the bottom of your teacup? You know, and that's kind of how sometimes reading the governor's directives is. I flash back to my grandmother with her Coke bottle glasses, looking at tea leaves left over in the bottom, and trying to figure out what that meant. Is very similar to trying to understand how some of the governor's directives have, what they meant, how they'd apply, and really there's some underlying assumptions that don't necessarily always work in small rural communities as easy as the governor thinks it would in Olympia. But it wasn't just the governor sending us some challenges. We have had a significant set of challenges with Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife and the setting of fishing seasons in response to regional population challenges for steelhead and Chinook. I believe is the one we're dealing with next. And yet in our area, because of this strong management and effort by the Quileute Tribes Natural Resource Division, Frank Geyer and all of his crew, and the Quileute Tribal Council, our Quileute River returns are relatively stable. There might be small deviations over time, but they don't have the significant drops that are being seen elsewhere. Also, you know, there's been a lot of work for salmon restoration projects that are benefiting salmon and steelhead in this area with a whole host of agencies, NGOs, and volunteers. So we've been really having to deal with minutia of WDFW emergency rules. It's an agency that has the ability to kind of act as its own without the governor's input, without the legislators' input. And I got to say a huge shout out to Senator Vanderweg, Representative Chapman, and Representative Theringer. When this all started back in November, December, with WDFW and is continuing forward, they've been pretty much engaged, asking what they can do and peppering WDFW with a lot of questions, and also some budget priorities and directives. And so we're going to go from there. I'm sorry, I just had something flash across my screen. Apparently, Forks, we've had our first positive since February at the Forks Community Hospital. Just a note came through on my desk. So that's 17, I think, for the year. But they've been very helpful. DNR, we continue to see some challenges with DNR. DNR and Fish and Wildlife, that natural resource element of our economic base is about 35% of our economic base is tied to natural resources, maybe even higher. The tourism sector has a significant role in our service sector, and then government is another significant portion of our economic engine out here on the West End, with prisons and state agencies and federal agencies and their employees.
Hey, Rob,
Yeah.
Real quick, why don't you stop sharing screen, and
Okay.
then, because you look tiny over there. Awesome. Now people can,
Okay.
thank you.
There you go. I'm using the phone here, my computer there, because it doesn't have a camera. So we're multitasking down at the end of the hall, and multi-teching. The DNR, one of the big challenges, we finally have a long-term marbled murrelet strategy, the last missing piece of the habitat conservation plan, which set aside 50+% of the DNR's holdings on the west end. Those are the facts. Those are, that's the fixed point in time. Those are the things, like, okay, now pivot from that and what can we do and how will we see the DNR market and address some of the issues within their assets. They undertook a review of a document done in the mid-1990s on trust asset management, and there's a group of recommendations in there. Some of those are interesting. They'd be making DNR a little more efficient and effective and nimble. Some of them are pretty challenging because they would fundamentally change the relationship between DNR and the trust beneficiaries, which is everything from schools down to the county government, down to the junior taxing districts, such as the hospital, the library district, I'm pointing to places here in town that you can't see, but the park and rec district and the port district, all of which are vital to rural communities such as ours. Well, last week, a group within the environmental caucus basically said we should rewrite the rules on what we just agreed on, that we didn't get everything. This is me paraphrasing their argument. We didn't get everything, and there's a few thousand acres of big tall trees that are not necessarily per se old growth, but those should be taken off the base as well, regardless of how many, the stand size, etc. So that's a really big challenge, and we are involved in litigation. The city is, along with other beneficiaries, involving the long-term marbled murrelet strategy. Some of those cases are bouncing around between Superior Court in Thurston County and one issue going up to the Supreme Court in Olympia. We partner with other law firms and other organizations, and while they're the lead, a few of us who have been doing this for decades are kind of the on the phone history. Oh, do you remember this document? Do you remember this conversation? Things like that. So those are some of the challenges. We also have some just infrastructure challenges. And since we're talking infrastructure at a national level and a state level, we are working really hard to try to make sure that Forks also gets to build back better once we're done with COVID. That we have we build and retrofit our sewer system, which has been award-winning since it started in the mid-1986, but it is in need of retrofit and rehabilitation and redundancy issues. As rules and regulations change, the requirements on us also change, but the money is never there to actually help us make that change. And the argument that the state and federal funders have made for decades is, well, just raise your rates. You have really low sewer rates, just raise them, double them, triple them. And I always start arguing back, saying, can we look at that chart that you told me to close the screen on and look at the demographics and look at the fact that we have a significant portion of our population that really works hard and still in the end of the day gets by. And they don't have the ability to have a sewer bill that's $75 a month or $90 a month in one conversation we were having. And so we've approached, as many other governments, the congressional delegation as they've looked for these community projects and community items of concern and identified a multi-million-dollar retrofit and rehab of the sewer system that would allow us to make the necessary improvements that allows additional capacity as we have build out in the city of Forks, and then also potentially do adjacent property annexations. Our sewer district, our sewer system is associated with the utility local improvement district. That's really just the center core of town when it was put in place. And so this would, but it didn't grab all the places businesses have developed, et cetera, and on-site septic requirements have become more and more stringent and challenging. So we are, like many others, putting our efforts in with that. We're also talking and discussing things, discussing ways to do other innovations from stormwater. We're working with some partners with Trout Unlimited, the Pacific Coast Salmon Coalition, and others to look at a innovative way to take a gravel pit and make that a stormwater project. During the COVID period, we have managed to bring on an emergency response well, because we actually had 2 droughts in the last 5 or 6 years, and we received funding for that. And those are just some of the things we've taken on, and we'll get it done, but we don't have huge staffing. So we've been extremely grateful to the city of Port Angeles, Nathan and Allison, for stepping forward and trying to work through the laborious labyrinth of community development block grant requirements that are associated with the April 2020 COVID Relief Act. And those funds, when we get them, would help us deal with some utility back payments and things like that. Well, we still haven't seen the money arrive to Port Angeles. And congressional staff held a meeting with state staff, and we are able to, I think, move that here forward, hopefully here in the next week or so. I think that's some of the things I was going to address. I know you wanted to ask me about community force. We'll talk about that, but I saw 2 things in here. Wild Olympics bill by the U.S. Congress, you know, if it's passed and signed into law, it will have some impacts. We've raised our concerns consistently for over a decade, probably more like 15, 16 years. And some of them have been addressed, some of them haven't. And we just agree to disagree on some of those issues. That's probably the best way to say that. Construction curriculum, I think that'd be something to be really interesting to talk with the Cleveland Valley School District and see. One of the challenges is that everybody runs like thin and spread thin, and so we've had construction programs here in the past, but when that instructor leaves, then suddenly we're unable to continue the program forward. But Diana Riome and her staff have just been incredibly dynamic and responsive. We have a virtual high school with Forks that has some 3,000 students in it that aren't in Forks, but they get a Cleveland Valley School District diploma and have been part of the virtual high school network for, in some capacity, I'm going to say 22, 23 years. The boss would know better than me when it started because he was there.
That's fascinating that 3,000 students in the virtual high school, you said?
Yep. The Insight Schools is the thing, and that might be something to reach out to Diana Riome and see if she'll do coffee with you, Colleen, and your guests. And she and her staff, they will make it work. I mean, that is I think an unwritten Forks model, because everything a challenge, they'll make it work.
Where do those students live?
All over Washington and the Northwest, and they can be anything from students with health issues to students who are Olympic athletes to students who traditional school settings weren't working well for them, and this allows them to do coursework online, accredited through the state of Washington, and maybe they're the one that's the breadwinner for their family. And some folks might go, what, but I did when I was in law school many years ago, I did a student instruction of street law, and we had in this district we were assigned to, my colleague and I, we had a group of students who they were the sole breadwinners, and they worked from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock every day to bring money into their family's household. And so that was kind of an eye-opening experience for us. And so that might be the student who's doing things with Insight Schools.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then Colleen, you're going to throw me a question on community force. So go for it. Ask your question.
So, we're hearing a lot about an environmental and economic solution being turning existing forests that have been historically, quote unquote, working forests or harvested forest lands into community forests. Can you explain that approach and the pros and cons to that? And are there examples in our county of that? I know that that's really an effort that is being promoted. And, is that viable in your eyes? Obviously, it's a anyway, share
Okay, so
experience.
a little full disclosure. I did serve on the Green Crow Board of Directors for 7 or 8 years. And so the Seattleite who came to Forks with some level of idealism on the role of government also learned some business requirements that you have to make things pay for themselves. And so I think the question with any community forest effort is just that. And this isn't new. Some on the screen that I'm seeing will remember Carol Johnson with North Olympic Timber Action Committee. Around 99, 2000, she attended a week-long conference at Yale on community forests led by Chad Oliver and others with the College of Forestry at Yale, and came back talking about that. And we worked with the Forterra, it had a different name back then, but Forterra, on discussing that concept as a third way of working forest between the private industrial forest sector and the state federal system. And have continued those discussions with the Nature Conservancy and with Forterra, I'm going to say for almost 2 decades. I can remember the first conversation with the Forterra rep. He had twins that were all of about a year old at that time, and they're, I think, graduating from high school. So that gives you some sense of there. To be honest, the question is, do you want a forest that will work and pay its bills? Or are you wanting a forest that's really something like a park where some folks can do some firewood and do some things in there? And I think those are some of the challenges when you start talking community forests. We've had the mayor's been part of these discussions more recently with the Nature Conservancy as part of the Emerald Edge project, looking at the idea of a community forest. Matt Kaminsky with American Forest Resource Council has been part of those discussions, and the perceptions of what that phrase means ranges everything from kind of a educational forest with outdoor recreational aspects, occasional harvest of some trees, to a forest that's being managed for ecological, economic, and social purposes, and trying to balance all 3 of those and pay their bills and not remove it off the tax rolls and not have its revenue dependent upon grants. Is there an example? Not in the full sense of community like oversight and involvement. There have been some community advisory based forest ownerships. The Hoh River Trust, some might point to. If I point to it, I would usually say it didn't work the way they wanted. We had a lot of work and research went in, talking to the timber companies, talking to DNR about that. We had significant concerns. And what we got told is, well, based on their revenue projections, 10 to 12 years, if they don't get some grant or state or federal bailout, this is going to be a challenge. And almost to the day, that's what happened. So, that's my community forest. I think a good legal answer is it depends what you mean. It depends what you want to do, and it depends on who's involved.
Well, good to know. So also, can you go into a little bit more about what, like how much acreage TNC has purchased and Forterra and kind of what their intention is? And then also I know that Rainier has now got an auction out for 23,000
Yep.
acres, right? Can you
Yeah.
speak to that as
Yeah.
well? From a land ownership,
Okay.
working forest aspect?
So all those things are like in any neighborhood. You get a new neighbor who moves in, right? And then you got to figure out what you share in common and where you just aren't ever going to agree. And for TNC and Forterra have a long history of interactions with the timber companies and with the NGOs and with communities. They are more triple bottom line, ecological, economic, and social. And so some of their objectives are a little different on how they value and what they decide the outputs are going to be. TNC, I'm gonna go, they are the steward now of the Hoh River Trust parcels, and then they have their own parcels further south. And I want to say their holdings on the west end are around 8,000 acres out of some probably 500,000 or 700,000 acres. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of trying to mentally add up things in my mind. I think that's about right. And they have been, you know, they have their objectives, but they've also been very willing to have discussions. There's some, the auction that's going on with Rainier has about, I think, 12 or 13,000 acres, 12,000 acres up in Western Clallam and Jefferson County, and then the rest are down in the Grays Harbor area. It's predominantly reprod or timber that's been harvested and replanted, and is in that early stem exclusion stage of growth, which is dense little trees and work there. And Rainier's a real estate investment trust, REIT, right? I think I said that right. And so they have some obligations to also offer for sale certain holdings in a given year. And you're seeing that. What that has done is these discussions of community forests, there's been like, well, if we were to buy something like that, we being who is my big question, and how, and with what resources. So, Tyler Crow would say, well, we taught him something. So you can teach an old dog some new tricks. But it started some discussions about, well, what does a community forest actually mean if you were to try to buy land and you had to pay the mortgage and pay the bills versus getting land granted to you either through grants to buy the land and then have those restrictions on them, et cetera. So I think we might have some more of those discussions in the future, Colleen. But there's a group of the environmental community caucus who says you never work with anybody. You're always, raising concerns and challenging some of us. And it's like, well, we managed to work with TNC and Forterra. We don't agree. It's like the neighbor you just, you might have your two different political signs or whatever in your yard, but you still go over and help them when their tree falls in their house, right? Or there's a birthday party, you take a card over to the kids. I think some of the perceptions about our interactions out here are more stereotyped in some people's minds than they are in reality.
So there was a really interesting question from a really smart man named Mike McAleer in the chat. So with the all the news about people coming from Central America across the border and many coming from Guatemala, and I know we have a large population of Guatemalans that speak, and do you say it mom or ma'am? M-A-M.
Mom.
Mom.
Yep.
So are you seeing a lot of people that are seeking asylum coming to the Forks area and children, or has that population increased much?
So my gut response, and we'll see whether Audrey and the mayor agree with me, is I don't think we've seen much of a change in the population percentage. 2010 census had around 24% of the Forks community that was Latino or Hispanic descent. And I think that's about the same, maybe smaller. The mix of that might have changed a bit from being from Mexico in origin to having and a little bit of Honduras and Guatemala to maybe a little bit more Guatemala and Honduras. When I'm dealing with court proceedings, that's when I first learned about Mom, Miss Checa, and there's one other one I'm trying to remember that are indigenous native languages to Latin America. And then Diana with the school district, and I see something that Brian put up. It's an area where that population at the school is part of the everyday mix. And some of the early efforts by the school district and virtual learning involved 20 years ago, a young girl, 5th grade, gave a presentation in English on frog biology to Senator Murray on a virtual video conference link 20 years ago. And the senator was laughing and the girl got real nervous. And the senator's like, no, honey, no, just keep going. And she gets done. She goes, I want to explain why I was laughing. You've sent 3 of my staffers running for dictionaries because they don't know the words you just used. She had only learned English, Tim, in the last 6 months? And I called Tim out because Tim was involved in making sure all the video links worked with the senator from the Senate floor. Mm-hmm. So, or the gallery. So, I mean, I would say that population's been pretty consistent, is my belief. But Audrey, Tim?
I see Audrey shaking her head, yes.
Okay.
You know, switching subjects here a little bit. I know we have Sig Tama on the line, and he's been working on a development in Forks. Mm-hmm. Yep. I hate to put you on the spot there, Sig, but he's in an opportunity zone. And the EDC did give him a small grant to help move that development along to test the soils. And I know he's working with the county. Sig, do you want to briefly? Yeah, for the septic. Sig, do you want to briefly share with everyone what you're working on there and what your hopes and intentions are for that housing development?
Yeah, sure, no problem. We approximately have about 13 acres there next to the mill and separately. And we plan on developing slowly for affordable housing. So we're not looking to do any large acreages or anything like that. We're working with Colleen County right now on the septic. We had soil testing done, we passed that. We're doing a short plat here shortly with some folks up in Forks, and we're going to do some survey, and then we have to remove some of the trees in order to put the roads in and start the lot process. And then Colleen County will come back one more time and test the soil per lot. So due to the fact that the septic tank was never been really expanded in Forks, we cannot hook up to the city. And there's no hookup at our street anyway. So, you know, we're going to go all separate septics inside the development.
So how many, some basic questions here. How many homes do you intend on building? And what would that price range be? And what are you looking at for a time frame?
Yeah, well, time frame, you know, ASAP. So as soon as Colleen County comes out and retests each lot, after we already submitted the soil tests and they granted that it was good to be separate septics. So then once that's done, construction will start, I would say within 60 days or less, depending on some other city permitting and city planning, okaying and so forth. Passing those little hurdles, I imagine. Rod can chime in on that here when I'm done on that. So anyway, I'm trying to sum it up here in my head without looking at my screen. I would say we're going to do probably 3 to 5 homes per year. I want to be in the Affordable Act only, and I mean, range of pricing. So pricing will be, I would say, between 240 to 280,000. And the homes will be 2-3 bedrooms. They'll be permanent homes, not mobile homes, anything like that. And on foundations. So that's the rough framework of the development we're trying to accomplish.
Got it. Thank you. So I know the West End Business Association has 11 people there or so. Is there anybody there that wants to ask a question of Rod or anyone? And also Kay did put something in the chat. She has been working. Kay, do you want to talk about the program that you've been working on with the different school districts in the county briefly? And then we'll
Sure,
go to
yes,
the
thanks.
left.
I'm working on workforce development because I experienced firsthand, not having enough contractors to build our home. And so that's what I'm doing my volunteer time with right now. I'm working with service organizations like Rotary and the school district and SWIM, and I'm ready to expand to Forks because I've learned a lot over the last year. There's 2 excellent programs, one at the national level for construction curriculum in the high schools, and one at the state level that's backed by OSPI. And this is hands-on learning. Students can graduate with construction certification, and it's just an awesome program. And they're already developed, canned, everything teachers need to do this curriculum is available, and there is funding available. So I'm happy to help Forks and expand our efforts.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yes.
So thank you. So, and Kate, did you put your email address in the chat? If anybody
I
wants
put my
to
email
great.
address in the chat. Please feel free to reach
Okay.
out. I'd be happy to talk to anyone.
Yes. Okay. And then, so anybody from the West End Business Association, do you have any questions there for our folks? Let me make sure you're not muted.
Sorry, I lost my screen for a minute. I don't, does anybody have a question? I think we just all want to say thanks to everybody at City Hall for doing a great job, and we appreciate everything they do.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting too to see the results of the census. In the last email that I put out, yesterday, and other people may have got it from other resources, but there are a series of webinars that are coming out from the federal level about how to look at those, the new census data that's coming out. So yeah, I'm really curious to see what the results are. I think we had a very good turnout in Clallam County from what I understand. And so, so much of the census data is based off the last census. So every 10 years, and then estimates are done based on a few phone calls that are made and surveys, but it's not, really that great of a picture until you get a census picture. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing some of those results. And then, yeah, Colleen Robinson has put in the chat here about a program that they have as well. And we put that also in the email that we sent out with the flyer. So thanks for all the work that these guys do. And, Habitat's such an important organization for our county as well. So does anybody have any specific questions for the folks here? I see Rod or Audrey or Tim, do you guys have any closing remarks you want to add? It's almost 9 o'clock. Or Bruce, is there something that you have been working on at the state level that you think is particularly important to the West End and the Forks area?
I think the one thing I might say to amplify what Rod talked about in terms of community forests is that 2 previous lands commissioners have now come out with a proposal to withdraw 5% of state lands in each of the next 20 years. So that would add up to all state lands into a conservation and carbon sort of status. And it isn't really been met yet with a lot of support, if you will, but we are seeing the Board of Natural Resources begin to say, we need to relook at the old growth issue again and redefining that to 80 years or older trees. So it's kind of like Rod said, we're kind of renewing some old conversations from the past.
So Bruce, is right now old growth 100 years and older? Or how is this new old growth definition different?
Rod, you might want to correct me, but it used to be that old growth was 150 years and older. I'm not sure if it's moved much, but 80 years is pretty young.
Yeah, 1850 stands 5 acres or greater that were in existence in 1850 is the Policy for Sustainable Forestry old growth definition. That's been the definition since 2007. That's been the definition we've used for all documents, sustained harvest calculations, rollover strategies, everything. And then God bless them both, Her Eminence and then Commissioner Goldmark. The discussion is like, well, if it's a big tree and it's just half an acre, we should save that too. And there's actually a document that lists trees as up to like 1929, 1930, I think is in the group. So the 21 below stands that, or we have trees that are in a stand where they're mainly 50 or 60 years old or 35, 40 years old. Suddenly 2 trees that are tall, and that's actually what that document table says. If it's a tall, big tree, we should make sure that's not cut. There's a lot of value judgments there on both sides, as you can tell.
I think one of the things that's kind of disturbing about this, Colleen, is that it's led to already previously sold sales that are under contract, the DNR to go back and revisit, and then demand from the purchaser that they withdraw some units of a sale out after they're actually under contract. So that's a huge problem that's probably going to end up winning its way through some sort of court process. But that's happened down in sales on the Capitol Forest, and it's not a healthy trend whatsoever if you're trying to have a predictable and stable supply of timber.
Got it.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. Yeah, as Commissioner Fran said that.
Yeah. Would that only apply to DNR lands and not U.S. Forest Service and not private lands if that change was made?
Forest Service is working off an 80-year-old stand, 80-year-old age and stand characteristics. I don't remember the stand size. So it wouldn't affect that. It is a significant change in Clown County, and we haven't seen maps as to how much of the county's trust lands this would affect. We were assured by Commissioner Franz that the long-term marbled murrelet strategy would address all these needs and ensure a stability timber base, and that there'd be no need to make modifications or changes. So it'd be interesting to see what the commissioner's position is now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if Audrey or Mayor Fletcher, do you have any last comments or thoughts? If not, it's after 9, and I think we should let people get on with our day. Audrey?
I don't have anything. Just thank you, Colleen, for this forum. Even though it was just yesterday, we found out we were going to be the speakers. So had to throw that in there.
Rod knew. But okay, well, thank you so much for being on with us today. Really appreciate your time and all the work you do for your community. So yeah, thanks everyone, and enjoy your day, and we'll be back next week. Oh, and we're having on May 5th, Commissioner Franz on. So you can make sure you have your questions ready when she comes on May 5th. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.